You're listening to a Monster Kid podcast.
G'day and welcome to A Dingo Ate My Movie, a podcast where we talk about the weird and wonderful world of Australian film from the 70s, 80s and beyond. As always, I'm your host Pete, and today I'm joined by Anna Schmidt of the Perfectly Paranormal podcast, love that name, to discuss the Babadook from 2014. Probably my latest movie I've ever done on this podcast, but welcome aboard, Anna.
Hello, Pete. It's great to be here.
I love the name of your podcast. It rolls off the tongue very nicely. The 3 Ps.
The 3 Ps. Well, life is perfectly paranormal from my point of view.
The Babadook is a 2014 Australian horror film about Amelia, a widowed mum, and her son Samuel. They find a creepy children's book about a monster called the Babadook and soon realise the creature is real and tormenting them. It's a psychological thrill ride that explores both grief and fear and all sorts of other things. It's a very unsettling movie at times. It stars Essie Davis, Noah Wiseman, Danielle Henschel, Hayley, I should have checked this one, McEnhaney, Barbara West, and Ben Winspear. It was written and directed by Jennifer Kent, who also wrote the book Monster and the short film which this movie is based on. The budget was $2 million. It made around $10 million at the box office. So it did really well. They did a round of fundraising, and then I think they got the balance from the government and a whole lot of other stuff. It's currently rated a 6.8 out of 10 on imdb.com and has a 98% critic score and a 72% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, which is really good. It's a very highly regarded film, this one. A lot different to a lot of the other films that I do on this podcast. I watched it on Netflix in Australia, so I think it's probably streaming somewhere in the world at any time. You can get the DVD. I think Umbrella Entertainment do the DVD. They have a Blu-ray, and now they have a 4K Blu-ray. I haven't picked them up yet, but I will. The film was primarily shot in Adelaide, South Australia, as per a requirement from the South Australian government, which actually provided some funding for the film. A lot of the interior shots were basically just shot on a soundstage in the city. One of the things I guess we'll talk about is how this would have been working with this young boy who was 6 years old in this movie. It was quite interesting to see whether it would be very harrowing for him, but it was interesting looking into the film a bit. That Jennifer Kent herself said that they had to be really protective of him when they were filming. They did some reverse shots where Essie Davis was abusing his character, and for those scenes, the director had Essie Davis yell at an adult stand-in that was down on his knees for the height. And she was saying that she didn't want to destroy someone's childhood just to make a movie, which I think is very good. What were your first thoughts on this film, Anna, when you first saw it?
Well, I'm what I call a paranormal addict. I work in the paranormal realm as a house healer, and I'll go into homes and clear people's homes of paranormal intruders. So I live the lifestyle of the paranormal every single day. So this movie is right up my alley because we're talking about an lower vibrational being that is in this home. And yes, I actually think for Sam, the character, it would have been quite unsettling for a boy of that age to be an actor in this movie. But I think that they would have mixed up the shots and substituted him out, like you said before, with an adult actor, because it's quite confronting. Like, I've watched it a few times and some of the scenes still make me shudder and sort of look away. And because being a mother, I would never speak to my child the way that she spoke to him. But there are reasons why she used that tone, which I'm sure we're going to talk about later on.
At first, I've got to say, the kid drove me up the wall. For about the first 20 minutes of the movie, he drives me nuts. And he's really annoying, and there's lots of memes on the internet all about it and all that sort of stuff. But eventually the movie got, a lot more serious and a lot more dark, definitely a lot darker. And I wasn't sure at times whether my initial thoughts were, are they having like a shared psychosis? Because obviously the mother was sleep deprived and she was, sort of dealing with grief and all that sort of stuff. The son was also very affected in a lot of ways as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, when I look at Sam, I feel that his character was actually very psychically open. Children are very open to the psychic realms. They see spirits, they see the lower vibrational beings, they feel them. They know they're around. And actually thought that Sam was on the spectrum. And I find that sometimes children who they're highly sensitive actually pick up on these paranormal beings. And I'm sure we're going to talk about some of the gadgets that he made. He was highly creative. Oh my gosh, a little bit frightening, but he had a reason why he made these gadgets. But he was just very open. I mean, you can talk about a shared psychosis. He would have felt his mother's grief, but he didn't know why until they tell us right at the end of the movie. But you found him annoying. I actually found him fascinating. I like to study people in these sorts of movies and see how the character develops and where they go with it.
Yeah, I think I found him annoying at first. I think it was just once the character did start developing, I think that's where it really caught on for me. And I just found it fascinating that this little boy could act this way for starters, and because he still had some scenes that he had to do in this movie that would have been probably difficult for him to do, right? Because there's scenes where he's kind of having a seizure in the back of the car, that sort of stuff. And for him to do that, I'm sure they did it in a way that they kind of, I don't know, made a game of it or whatever they did to kind of, make it easier for him. But a lot of those scenes, he can't help but being in with his mother in the movie. And a lot of those scenes are quite disturbing. I found it quite disturbing, and I also found it quite thought-provoking. So my wife and I both watched it the other night. And when I woke up in the morning, I said, just the usual thing, asked my wife how she slept. And she said, well, I would have slept better if it wasn't for that movie. And I said, well, why were you scared? She said, no, I just spent most of the night just thinking about it. And I was the same. I just spent a lot of time just thinking about the movie and about what I just watched and trying to make some sense of it. And there's so many little parts of this movie that we won't cover everything on this because, one, I don't really want to give a lot away because it's definitely a movie worth watching if you haven't seen it. I'm sure a lot of people have, but it's just like, it's such an interesting movie. Like you've got the relationship with the mother and her sister, and that's been taught for a few years, and it sort of blows up, and then you've got the next door neighbor, and I'm trying to figure out where she fits into all this. Really, really interesting stuff.
Well, the thing is, you've also got the relationship between Amelia and I'm going to call it a demonic being because it was definitely down the darker end of the scale. The relationship that she had with that being was quite interesting. And being a paranormal worker, that is what I found most fascinating. From the beginning through to the middle of the movie where it takes a very, very dark turn. And the actual outcome was my favourite part. I won't say because I don't want to spoil it for anyone. And I'm probably actually going to watch it again tonight because every time I watch that movie, I pick up on different aspects. I pick up on other aspects that I didn't see last time. Because I work, like I keep saying, in the paranormal world every day. And a lot of people don't see it, don't feel it, don't want to know about it. They just want to keep it as paranormal drama. But paranormal beings, from my perspective, if you don't mind me saying, they connect to us because we are energy beings in these physical bodies who create emotional imprints, which is what Amelia does in this movie. She has a massive build-up of grief And that creates a vibration. And when she creates that vibration and she carries it for a very long time, it can attract paranormal beings to her in the house. And this is what her son sees in the home. And being, well, the man in the family, as I saw him, as his character developed, he took on the role of protector.
I always thought when I was watching the movie, like at the start of the movie, you know she's already worn out and she's already grieving and still grieving, but she just gets worse and worse during the movie. And the feeling I got was that the entity was kind of trying to get in, and when she got to this point of just sheer exhaustion and just total losing her mind, basically, to me that was kind of like the opportunity that that entity was looking for to enter her, because there was a period where it almost becomes like a possession movie, right? Like she was definitely possessed by something. I'd actually just listened to, don't think I've quite finished it. You've got a recent episode about exorcisms, and I kind of was thinking about that when I was watching the movie. I was like, oh, this is kind of a bit like what Anna's talking about on our podcast.
Yes, absolutely. I don't like using the word exorcism because it brings up priests and crosses and holy water and tying people to beds, which is not what possession is. If you watch this movie, you will see what I call the three phases, where this energy being knows that she's full of grief. So it's drawn to her because of her grief. And it starts testing her. There starts being the bruises and the scratches and the tiredness and the wearing her down, asleep, and all sorts of other issues. And then it starts to destabilize her. We won't talk about all the things that happen because we don't want to spoil it. But then there is that point in the movie where she is most vulnerable. It's almost like she fully lets down her guard. That's its point in. And there's a few things that occur in the movie after that I found quite shocking, that are still in my mind forever. But it wasn't her at that stage. What she did was not her. It was this being manipulating this physical body. Now, I see possession in people. I think through the work I've done, I've probably seen possession maybe 6 times to different varying levels within people. Now, you can help these people if you know what you're doing. I don't use sage. I don't use holy water. I don't use crosses. It's about finding the trauma and the emotional imprints that are in people that attracts these paranormal beings. And I quite often will work with my clients. They will have had to see their doctor first, a mental health professional, have to be under medical care. Then I will look at the energetic aspect of the person. Now, Amelia was really interesting because right at the end, my favourite part is where she took her power back. And that's all I'm going to say. But it was really, really empowering.
That was a great scene.
Yep.
We can spoil a bit because I think most people have watched this movie, or I think I always make it really clear when I talk about films in this podcast, we are going to spoil stuff because that's just the way the conversation goes, right? If we go around it too much, but we'll try and sneak around it a little bit because there are some good bits. I think it's really interesting that Samuel can see that it's not his mother as well. He kind of says to her a few times, "You're not my mother. You're not my mother."
No, he knew.
Which is quite interesting.
He knew his mother's
right?
behaviours, because we all have behaviours. We all have attributes, ways that we do things, ways that we talk to our children, the way that we cook, the way that we walk, the way we talk. And when energy beings enter a person, their energy changes. They feel different. They might feel colder to someone that's talking to them. They might feel warmer. I quite often find when I'm talking to someone that has paranormal entities within them, and believe me, most people have some level of paranormal attachment just because of life experiences, traumas, addictions, and so forth. I have particular physical signs that tell me that that person has paranormal entities present. And I just find it fascinating. Like this movie is just totally, it's very real. It is absolutely real. I could see what happened to her in this movie happening to people in reality. I mean, it's not connected to a book. That is simply
device.
That is the device that they've used. These beings are in our environment all the time. And this is what I talk about on my podcast, what I used to talk about on my YouTube channel, was to educate people in a non-fear-based way. Like when I talk about possession, as in this movie, you just make it real for people. And then you can recognize the signs when someone's personality changes, their eating habits change, their sleeping habits change. They go from being totally sort of calm and demure and just a really nice, kind person to being outright aggressive, dangerous, and the behaviors are just not normal. And it can be connected to mental health and to their emotional trauma, their life traumas, their life experiences. So it is mental health. I never ever say anything is just paranormal. But demonic level beings don't create what's in a person, they enhance what is already there. I make that very, very specific when I talk to people. The devil never makes you do it. But if you've got a predisposition or a big build-up like Amelia did of grief, they can manipulate you and poke you to behave in certain ways because they've had that vulnerability and they've got into your personal energy field.
Like her personality takes a 180. There's,
It's
you know, there's
frightening.
like,
Her change
yeah,
is
it's frightening
absolutely
how it
frightening.
changes, right? Yeah, it's almost, and I guess I'll be wary mentioning it because you've already sort of mentioned this thing. It's almost a bit like Linda Blair in The Exorcist, right? Where she starts off, she's so nice, and then her
Yeah.
personality changes completely.
But there's no what's the word? Projectile vomiting. There's no vomiting up nails or walking across the ceiling. All these things that I talk about. People who have possession, some of them hide it really, really well. I talk about it especially through that episode I've just put out. I think it's number 32. I'm so far ahead with my scheduling, I sometimes forget what is actually released. But yeah, there's a couple of stories in that podcast episode where you would never pick that the person is possessed because the underlying energy beings, they're very sneaky and they're very manipulative and they want to keep the person in that low vibrational state. And they don't want people like me being employed to clear them because then the energy beings have to move out and go and find themselves another host and it's all too hard for them. They like to stay where they are. Can I just mention something about a case I did the other day?
Yeah.
Now, I won't mention a name or a location, but there was a young man, he'd had a very long history of cocaine usage and his mum came to me because the doctor couldn't help him. The mental health practitioner they couldn't help him get off the couch. Like he was lying around all day, he had no energy, he wasn't motivated with life. When he did get some motivation and he got up and he thought, I'll get a job, I'll get back out in the workforce, something pulled him back into that negative state. Now, because he'd been on cocaine for such a long time, I think it was 10, maybe 15 years, he was used to living in that low vibration. He'd attracted energy beings to him that were feeding off what he was creating from that cocaine vibration, as well as all the emotions that went with it. And his mum said to me, which was the clincher, she said, every time he picks up and he's happier and he gets out into life and wants to do things, he falls back into a hole again. And I went, that tells me he has demonic level beings manipulating him. Now, I worked with him and his mum told me the other day that his life is looking better, like he's happier, he's more stable mentally and emotionally. She said he's more settled. He's got a job interview next week. And I've really got my fingers crossed for him that he can get back out there and stay living in that high vibrational state.
Interesting. That's really interesting.
Yeah. So it's out there. Possession is out there. You don't always, the movies have given us a dramatic view of it, not a reality view.
Oh, yeah. There's bits of this movie where she's seeing her late husband, especially near the end of the movie. Now, I'm thinking, is there any link there between this entity and her? Like, is it her late husband, or is it something else, or something that's just giving her that vision or whatever?
So we know what happened to Amelia. Can we say what happened to her?
Yeah, we can.
She lost her husband in a car accident. She didn't seek mental health care. And so for, I think it was 7 or 8 years, she had a massive pool of grief. And this energy being knew that. Don't ask me how they can read people energy. They just know. They knew that she had grief. So what would make her create more grief would be to see her husband standing in front of her. So it took on the facade of the partner. So seeing him would also destabilize her and make her question, why am I seeing you? Are you dead? Are you alive? And am I in a dream? So it kind of makes people question their reality and their mental health. And this being was slowly sort of wearing her down so it could get into her energy field, her chakras, get into her mind, become that possession that we hear so often talked about.
Well, at the end of the day, it's asking her to bring the boy to him. Remember that bit? I think it was near the end of the film where it's the husband, or the vision of the husband she's seeing, is asking her to bring the boy to him.
Yeah. And is that it wants to possess the boy as well? Or does it actually want to harm the boy? Or is she a crossing point? Because demonic beings always move from host to host. This is what I find when I do people clearing, is that when I clear them from my clients, they will always come through that cord that I create to work with a client, an energy cord. They will come to me and then I have to clear them from myself. So was it using Amelia as a halfway point to actually get to the boy? Because if that being was in a 6-year-old, it's going to have a lot longer lifespan with him than it is with a middle-aged woman.
I just wanted to take a short break and thank you all for listening. Don't forget you can follow a Dingo Ate My Movie on social media. We're at Dingo Movie on Twitter, Dingo Movie Pod on Facebook and Instagram, and we're on the web at dingomoviepod.com. Don't forget also, if you'd like to support the show, leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, or more importantly, share the show with your friends. Of course, you can always buy me a coffee over at buymeacoffee.com/dingomoviepod. Once again, thanks for listening, and let's get back to the episode. I really love it because it is a dark film in a lot of ways, but it did have some funny bits. Like my favorite scene, or one of my favorite scenes, is probably when those social workers come to the house and they ask Sam how he's going, and he says he's a bit tired from all the drugs that Mum's given me. And I'm like, well, that's a very honest young boy. And that's his character though, right? He just says things straight out. Like he says to somebody very early in the movie that my dad lives in the cemetery or something like that. And he's just very direct.
But kids are direct. I worked with children as a teacher assistant for like 12 years. So with 5 and 6-year-olds, they tell you there's no beating around the bush with kids. You ask
there's
them
no
a
filter,
question,
right?
they're going to give you the answer. And see, this movie offers lots of people with different perspectives, different ways to look at it, different ways to read it, different things to think about. So one of the things that I thought about with this movie, because I work with dark and demonic beings pretty much every day, is that they are energy beings, just like your higher vibrational beings, your guides, angels, archangels, and so forth. But they're just at the other end of the scale. They have emotions of their own. They have a soul, whether you want to think about that or not. I've worked with them long enough to know there is soul energy there. Was this being lonely as another point of why it actually came to Amelia? Did it want
he
a
was just
family?
looking for someone.
Yeah.
He just wanted almost like he wanted a friend, so to speak.
Yeah. Because,
and you kind of see that at the end of the movie, right? Where she's gained control and they're kind of, once again, it's probably going to spoil it, but what the hell? They're kind of living with it.
she manages the relationship is how I call it.
Yeah.
She manages it.
Yeah, I think so.
And I feel that in a way, she felt sorry for it. And I feel that in a way it was lonely and it was looking for I don't know why it doesn't connect with its own kind. That's probably a whole other topic to think about for another time.
Yeah.
But it was drawn to her. It was drawn to her energy. And I think in a way, as much as it did the possession thing, maybe in another perspective, it didn't really want to hurt her. It just wanted to be close to her. I know that's a bit macabre and a bit out there.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
But if it wanted
It was
to
just trying to get her attention.
well, yeah, if it wanted to actually kill them, it probably could have. You know, pushed her down those stairs. The stairs were very steep. I mean, when she had that knife and did what she did in the movie, she could have actually turned it on herself.
Yeah.
You know, and then she would have been dead and she would have been in spirit and possibly been with this energy being. I don't know why. Maybe it was banished to the earth reality for some reason. There's so many different aspects to look at. But I feel that it was actually lonely and it was trying to attach to her. And being a demonic level being, they don't know how to deal with humans in a decent way. And it was just doing what I think it was the only thing it understood how to do.
There's so much to unpack with this movie. I just found it really hard to actually unpack everything because, like I said, I was looking at the relationship with her and her sister and how that had gone downhill. And the sister has that moment where she says to her, "I hate being around your son," and then she gets angry at her sister for saying that.
Yep.
But then she sort of says, "Well, I think you do too." There's just so much, and some of the imagery in this movie is amazing. Like when I think of things like the book, for starters, like you were saying, the book is probably just a plot device, right? Because I was thinking one of the first questions is like, well, if this is like some sort of entity, where did the book come from? How they link together, right? And because I have no idea where the book comes from, and then she tears the book up, and the book just turns up again. She burns it; it doesn't matter; it's still there, right? So I'm not sure where the origins of the book are. And then the stuff she's watching on TV. It's very interesting, the TV shows she's watching occasionally, although we get a nice shout out for Skippy the Bush Kangaroo on there, which is quite good. I'm always chuffed to see Skippy the Bush Kangaroo. And some of the imagery on the TV shows and things like that was interesting. And I think some of the imagery for the entity or the Babadook itself was taken from like some very early horror films from like the 20s and 30s and 40s, that sort of thing. There was also talk that Jennifer Kent early on wanted to film the whole thing in black and white, and which would have been a very interesting way to watch the movie as well if it was in black and white, because that just changes the whole thing. But I just find there's so much to unpack with this movie that it's just like almost not overwhelming, but it almost feels like that. Like I said, that first night you go to bed and you're just laid in bed thinking about it.
Yeah, exactly. And if we looked at Amelia's sister, her relationship with her nephew, I just don't think she understood Sam as an individual. She didn't actually want to because he was, I don't want to use the word different, he was very creative. He was very down to earth, whereas her family were all about the looks and the shoes and the princess dresses for the daughter. It was all very materialistic. Whereas Amelia and Sam didn't have that material life. It's almost like the sisters were at two different ends of the scale. And the sister was so wrapped up in herself. And I know that Amelia had sort of, how can I put it? She'd drawn on her sister's energy a lot and probably she'd got sick of hearing the same old story all the time. But Amelia really was struggling. You think her sister would have taken her off to see a psychologist. There would have been some sort of intervention. It was really obvious that she needed mental health care, you know?
Yeah.
And with Sam with the tablets, I mean, you'd think that the doctor would have said, well, look, we need to book you in to see a psychologist to help you work through your grief. Have you seen a grief counsellor? Because Sam couldn't sleep because he was protecting his mum from what was in the house because he knew it wanted to get to her. But how does a young boy explain that to their parent or to the lady next door? Now, we didn't talk about the lady next door. I got sort of sidetracked, as I do when I talk about the paranormal. I just feel like she was a grounding figure throughout this whole movie because it spends a lot of time in the ether, you know, talking about the darkness and about energy and about vibration and about this dense energy. She was almost like a grounding force, like that earthly grandma sort of figure that would be there for Sam if he needed someone. So I just feel like she was a nice old lady next door who was lonely herself and that really enjoyed Sam's company.
You can see that at the end, like that final one of the final scenes where he's obviously been staying with her when she comes home from work. I think actually in a movie as dark as this, you kind of need a character like that to kind of just bring a bit of normalcy into it and to make it like, oh, okay, when she's around, there's nothing really bad going on, and she has their interests at heart. The other scene that's interesting, and I guess it's the only blooper I can remember in the whole film, is when Sam pushes his cousin out of the cubby house when they're having that argument, and she's being absolutely terrible to him, and her mother's not having a bar of it when it all happens. She's just like, oh, it's all Sam's problem. It's all his problem. He's the one. But she was standing there telling him in that house, a 6-year-old boy, she was telling him, as kids do, I guess, that, you don't have a dad, you're not special, blah, 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 etc. And he pushes her out. The only blooper I saw in the film is she falls out, I think, backwards, but is forwards when she's on the ground. When he comes out and he says he's making his excuse to why he pushed her out, then the girl's mother or Amelia's sister is not having a bar of it. She's just like, there's something wrong with you. I'm not listening to what you're doing, what you're saying. And that's it. She's got no time for him at all, like you were saying.
No, well, it's Mummy's little princess, never does anything wrong. She can say whatever she likes and she can hurt whatever whichever person that she likes through her words. But I mean, what Sam did was wrong. Pushing her was wrong. But children and adults will react in a split second if they are triggered. She knew she was her mother's daughter to a T. Even at the age of 6, she was quite nasty for a 6-year-old. Obviously, parent modelling hadn't been very good. So she triggered Sam in such a way because he'd had trauma in his life. He's still got trauma. His dad's dead. His mum's unwell. The lady next door is sort of like a grandmother figure, which is helpful. But he just reacted like anyone would react in that split second, especially a child. They're not going to think first, oh, if I push her, she's going to fall out. He was reacting because of what she said. And if the mother was decent, she would have asked both sides of the story. Well, actually, you shouldn't have said that to Sam. You are just as much at fault as he is. But she was just so one-sided, not even interested. They're totally different people.
Well, there's even the point where obviously they've had both their birthdays at the same time every year, the two cousins, and then it comes to the point where Amelia asks her about, what do you want me to do for this upcoming party? You want me to get the cake or something? And then she has to tell her, well, I'm not going to do that this year. That I just want my daughter to have her own party, which in a way I kind of agreed with as well, because it's like Amelia really needs to move on, but like she probably should have had that help. To do so. And it was very interesting that at the end of the movie, she actually is celebrating his birthday on the right day. Almost a happy ending in a way. No one really dies in this movie except like obviously the father, but you knew that before the movie even started. It's really interesting how they've taken this great journey through this film, and at the end she's kind of almost content with the world. She looks like she's back at work. She looks better in general. She seems more in control. Like you said, there's that scene that you love where she kind of just stands up to everything, and really owns it. And I think that's where she takes control. And once she takes control, then she's empowered and she's happier, and she's got this entity kind of under her control. Or is it just there, it's quite happy to be living like that now because he's getting attention, or whatever it is getting attention, even if it is just eating worms.
Do you know, you took the words right out of my mouth. As you were saying all that, I'm going, this whole movie, as dark as it was, and some of the things that did happen, the whole thing made her a stronger human being. She actually took control of her life and went, you know what? I'm not going to live like this. I know you're here. You're going to be staying here for whatever reason that is. we're going to have to get along. So we're going to have to compromise. So she compromised with a demonic level being. It stayed in the basement. She fed it what she could. Not that she probably needed to feed it anything anyway, because it's an energy being, but we won't go there with that. I think that was more an offering. That was more giving it an offering as, I appreciate you. I know you're here. We need to kind of look after each other. And I feel like she actually had a sense of compassion for this being. I mean, quite often when I work with clearing these demonic beings from people, like I said before, they'll come through the cording that I create. I clear them for whatever they're attached to within me, because they're only interested in the emotions. I clear that, away they go back out in the environment. You don't harm them. You don't disrespect them. I work very respectfully with these beings, because you've got to remember there are millions of them out there. And I've had experiences in the early days where if you're rude to them or you try to do something inappropriate, there is a backlash, there is retaliation. So I've learned that what I put out with them, the way I treat them, is generally what I get back. So that's what Amelia did, is that this thing retreated to the basement because it was a dark place. It could be down there and exist in, I actually think there was a portal down there too. But that's a topic for another. I think maybe it used to come and go through the basement, which is very dark in that back corner. But I think it just liked her. For whatever reason, it felt a connection to her energy for some reason. There's a lot, like you said, there's a lot to unpack in this movie. It's more than what you see on the surface.
Absolutely. That's, like I said, had a lot to do with my 5 hours sleep instead of the usual 7 or 8. The final thing I'll say about this movie that is so good is that it's super chilling. It's quite scary in parts. It's disturbing. But the best part that I remember is never once that I can recall did the movie resort to jump scares. I don't think there's one jump scare in this movie. You know what I'm talking about with the jump scare, right? So there's nothing. It's all atmosphere and just disturbing themes and things like that makes it frightening. And I think that's what makes a great movie great, is that especially with a horror film, because horror films rely, like if you've seen Insidious or any of those movies really rely on jump scares, like really quiet and then some bang or something like that. Whereas this movie really, there was banging and things, but it wasn't kind of done in such a way to make you jump. It was just there, if you know what I mean. So I think that's what elevates this movie above some others. And
well, I always say to people that there's a difference between the horror paranormal movies and true paranormal movies, which is what the Babadook is. It is purely psychological and it's actually very real. So this is what I like. And this is why my podcast is called Perfectly Paranormal, because it's normal. It's just a normal part of our life. And you can see it in Amelia. This being is in her house. Her son is interacting with it. She's interacting with it. It's causing all sorts of trauma. This is what they do. A lot of those other movies, you might get, like the ones we've mentioned, you might get maybe 10% of it is what I would call real paranormal. The rest of it's what I call paranormal drama, which is what people want. They don't want the real stuff. They want the drama stuff that's going to give them the jump scares and the fear and so forth, because that's horror. That's not real paranormal.
All right. So that was a very good conversation around the Babadook, which I loved. You loved it?
Absolutely.
You said you're gonna watch it again, so that's great. I'll probably watch it again for sure, because there's still so much that I want to get out of it. And I think movies like that really benefit from multiple watches. So looking forward to that. So tell me a little bit about your podcast and what your latest episode's all about. And where they can find you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I talked a little bit about that during our interview.
That's all right. This is the official plug section.
Oh, sorry. So here we go. So I work as what I call a paranormal house clearer. So I'm based in Tasmania in Australia, and I work worldwide. I'm actually starting a job in Florence, Italy tomorrow. All you need is the permission of the person who owns the property, photos, floor plans, and a couple of other things, and I can enter that property energetically and clear the energy presences that are there that shouldn't be there. It's fascinating work. So my podcast is based on sharing real life experiences. I always change people's names and locations if I ever mention a location, and usually the gender. So you're going to find it really hard to pinpoint it to a particular person if you think you know who they are, because it's all about sharing the experiences to make it relatable. Just as we've talked about in the Babadook, is that what Amelia went through is actually very relevant to real life. So I take the paranormal in reality. I don't do the horror, don't do the jump scares. What I talk about is no fear in what I talk about through my podcast. It's very relatable. I do make it slightly not dramatic, I suppose. I'm a Leo, so I'm slightly dramatic. I make it interesting, but there's none of the fear-based. There's no gore. I mean, I've got 10-year-olds watching it. Their mums, listening to it. Their mums let them listen to it because then they can understand about the paranormal world around us. And I share lots of what the signs and symptoms are, how these beings affect you, so that you can notice in your environment when things change, or you go into a place and all of a sudden you don't feel well, your stomach's hurting, your head's hurting, your vision's blurry, all these sorts of symptoms. It's just about awareness. So I'm all about educating people about the paranormal world that is around us.
I found it really accessible, the episodes I've listened to, and I also think it's great that you don't go straight for the paranormal stuff in the way that you always say, and I think you mentioned this earlier today, is see a doctor, see a psychologist or a psychiatrist, then we'll talk about it. So in other words, let's make sure there's no other issues there, then we can go from there.
Absolutely.
What's your latest episode? Is it the one I listened to the other day?
It's episode 32, and it's all about possession. I talk about 3 or 4 different stories that I've experienced of possession through my many years of doing this work. And it's all very relatable. I mean, there's nothing scary about the way I talk about this. And this is why I find that it's hard to promote it, because they all want the paranormal drama.
You're on socials? Can people contact you on social?
I have Instagram. I also have a website, and I can send you those details if you like.
Yeah, that'd be great, because I'll put them in the show notes.
Yeah, that'd be lovely.
Well, thanks so much for coming on. It's been great talking to you.
You're welcome. I've loved it. I can always talk about the paranormal anytime.
I know. I can tell. And when we return, we'll be talking about what's coming up next.
And now, preview time. When it comes to entertainment, you can't beat a good film. So let's take a look at what's coming your way.
What we see and what we seem are but a dream within a dream. You must learn to love someone else apart from me, Sarah. I won't be here much longer.
Good morning, girls.
Good morning, Mrs. Attenborough.
Well, young ladies, we are indeed fortunate in the weather for our picnic to Hanging Rock. I have instructed Mademoiselle that as the day is likely to be warm, you may remove your gloves once the drag has passed through Wood End. You will partake of luncheon at the picnic grounds near the rock. Once again, let me remind you, the rock itself is extremely dangerous, and you are therefore forbidden any tomboy foolishness in the matter of exploration, even on the lower slopes.
Next up on A Dingo Ate My Movie, I'm joined by a very good friend of the show, Tab, and we'll be talking about Peter Weir's mysterious and haunting Picnic at Hanging Rock from 1975.